Parts of a community, and the arrests are happening in a totally different part. And that just didn't seem like a smart way to try to solve this problem if you don't have access to the technology when and where it's needed. So that's really where this concept of the 4-minute city came about, is when we figured out that, hey, we can, through a connected system, get data to the right people at the right time. We can help deliver AEDs potentially more effectively. This concept of the 4-minute city came about. And what it is, it's essentially going into a community, assessing the needs of that community and the state of cardiac arrest response in that community, and deciding we're going to deploy 200, 300, 400 devices, depending on the needs of that community, in a strategic manner. So not only are we going to connect these or deploy these devices, they're going to be connected into the 911 center, like Rory described. We're going to be able to get the data for them to EMS, down to the downstream providers where the patients are actually transported at the hospital, and really try to make a connected system of response in that community, and help that Avive's AED can be a catalyst for that. And so in a number of communities, we are deploying 400 devices or 300 devices based on where the data tells us to deploy them. So you look at where the cardiac arrests are happening, and then create a deployment strategy of, we're going to put these in the places where they're actually needed the most. And that's the only way that we do that, is if we create a centralized or top-down program where the funding or the deployment of them comes from one body, and then we're actually deciding with the community which hands to put the devices in, versus going and asking business X or school Y, can you buy an AED? We're actually putting them where we think they're going to make the biggest impact.
Well, and that's something that I want to applaud you gentlemen for, because the beautiful piece about this entire model is that you are essentially embedding yourself into this community, and you are assessing the culture of CPR response and of the knowledge of cardiac arrest. And that's not a small feat. I mean, that's very easy to say. It's an incredible, and from our offline conversations, I don't know if you can verbalize how much work that is, but I mean, tell us some of the strategy behind, how do you just show up into a community and say, hey, this is this looks good. This looks like a good spot.
So I think there are a few key tenets that we really focused on, but to even get there, to pick a handful that we've picked to start with, me and my colleague Micah, who leads commercialization for us, I mean, we traveled around the country for 12 plus months and visited probably 70 to 80 cities and counties across the country. And really the key tenets that we looked for was, first and foremost, above anything, a culture of collaboration. There are communities out there, it's sad to say, where fire and EMS and 911 don't want to sit in the same room together and don't want to figure out how to solve problems to get there together. We knew that wasn't going to work for us. We needed a place where people enjoyed working together, people enjoyed solving tough problems together, because this is the toughest problem probably of them all to address. So that was first and foremost number one. And then number two, a burning desire to do better. Right? Not being accepting of the status quo, but wanting to say, hey, my community is going to be different. My community isn't going to, be the standard. Hey, we save 10% of people and we're the national average. No, we want it to be 15. We want it to be 20. We want to be 30%. And it's going to be a process to get there, and it's going to be work, and it's going to be hard, but we're going to be the difference maker in our part of the country. And we're going to be the lighthouse that's making an impact.
So how did you identify those? Was this a lot of boots on the ground work at conferences, or how did you develop the network in order to identify the cities that you wanted to target?
I called my friends, and they just introduced me to all these fire chiefs. It was great. No, that's not how it happened. But so number one, through my nonprofit network and the work that I had done there, I kind of had these champions that were local stakeholders in every state. right? Who knew the local EMS coordinator, knew the local EMS chief, the fire chief, the 911 telecommunicator. They were the spokesperson for cardiac arrest in their community. And so that was a huge advantage for us, is where we could give them a call and say, hey guys, I don't know if this is going to work, but this is a concept we have, and we want to go and try and educate others about this concept and see if there's buy-in and interest in what we're doing. So definitely went to them. There were some trade shows. That was a natural place to really get the attention of fire chiefs or leadership in public safety. But Rory, myself, and the team, we're really fortunate to also have some great advisors in the space. People who have been in the cardiology space, been in the EMS space, and they were really instrumental in providing those warm introductions. Because otherwise, we're just two guys from California, right? Who are like, hey, cool, we can do this, and technology, and yay. But it was through those warm introductions, whether it was through our nonprofit partners and friends or our advisors, that really got us in the door. And then what we realized immediately was, if we got in the door with leadership in that community, public safety leadership, what very quickly happened without us asking is the fire chief in that city would call the fire chief in a neighboring city and say, hey, you got to talk to these guys about this concept, because it can make an impact. And then that's how it kind of spread. So we may have had 10 conversations we organized, but honestly, the way we got to 70 or 80 was, the fire department in Jackson, Tennessee said, go talk to the guys in Memphis. And the guys in Pennsylvania said, I want to do this in 5 counties in central Pennsylvania. So thanks for talking to me, but those guys better be next. And so please go talk to them as well. So, I think that's where we figured out, like, oh, wait, this might actually be something. And this might be a really unique way to deploy defibrillators in a community, because it's fundamentally different than what's being done today. And most importantly, it's data driven, which is the most important missing element in my mind today.
So one of the guys we've actually had on this podcast, Dr. Michael Kurz, who I know you guys are very familiar with. He has in the past described this device not as an AED, but as a data collection tool that occasionally delivers a shock. Which is somewhat or as absolutely unique from others. Rory, how do you use these data that's being collected by this AED to better the deployment, better patient care, and kind of lead to more iterations in the future?
Well, I think one of the first steps is having data. One of the big missing gaps today is there is no data about true, like, from the device, from what has actually happened. It's exceedingly limited for what you can get. And so if we're talking about deployments, right, we're going to learn a lot as we deploy our first communities in our cities. But the difference is that we can iterate on that, right? We can see where each cardiac arrest call is located. We can see if that aligns with how we've deployed these devices, or whether we need to adjust so that we have more density in certain areas or less density in other areas of a community. We can refine our kind of estimates for how many devices you need in an area. We can refine our estimates for the workflow that is needed in a 911 telecommuter's dispatch sequence to get to the point of, is this a cardiac arrest, and press that button faster to save a minute or a minute and a half here and 2 minutes there in the process. We can adjust the instructions that we're giving to people based on what we find from the field. And so in kind of every little element of this, we are able to adjust, collect that data, and understand how these cardiac arrests are happening, where they're happening, and what the best deployment strategies that we can have are. After that device use, one of the biggest things we do is offload the data from the incident, right? So we get the incident report that is captured from electrode pads being applied to that patient, that initial heart rhythm that was there much before, hopefully, the ambulance even arrives. And that's another report that we're getting, that we are sending to the appropriate stakeholders. But it's another huge tool in understanding, right? One of the big, pieces of information that often is lacking when you're kind of going downstream from the AED is, what was the initial rhythm of that person? And that's so hugely critical to what that patient is going to get as follow-up treatment and even immediate treatment. And so just having that, right, and having that in a systematic way, and having that in a refinable way, an improvable way, I think is going to make a huge difference in the way that we respond to cardiac arrests.
Yeah, Rory, I'll add one thing if you guys don't mind, just around the when you sit, when at least from me observing cardiac arrest from a public safety lens, right? When I would sit in an ambulance and we would go on ride-alongs, and the handoff points between each stakeholder I found were full of a lot of statements where I think they were down for this long. I think that we delivered 2 shocks. I think that this happened. I think that there were very little I knows stated, right? And I think that that's where you can start creating connectivity between each of these stakeholders, where we can start having some I knows about what happened before EMS got there to complete the story and complete the picture of that arrest, which ultimately I think helps downstream care. You guys, Brandon and Jason, know a lot better than we do here. But we think that that can help provide a more complete picture of that arrest. Everything from when did the button get pushed in 911? When did the first AED get there? When was the first shock delivered? How many shocks were delivered? All the way down to the when EMS arrives on scene. And so that's a big part of the piece of the puzzle to us as well, is trying to create a complete story for that arrest, not just from EMS arrival onward.
Another kind of underappreciated aspect of this is even just knowing where these devices are at all. One of the things that can often get missed is you might sell a device to a particular place, it might be there, but its status, its actual location can change. It can be something that nobody actually keeps up with. It can, it just is there. And so even just little things before the emergency of knowing that your devices are healthy, knowing where they are, knowing that they haven't moved or they haven't had something happen to them, is a huge deal, because it means that you have a always active and always accurate repository of where your devices are, how they may need to be distributed and things of that nature. And so I think that'd be another piece that I'd add to that, is just even before we even get to the 911 call, having a system that is ready to actually respond to it in a thorough way.
Yeah, and I think your point too, and I want to clarify that for the people listening that maybe are on the hospital side or more on the definitive care side. And Sameer, you said a lot of things of I think this. Well, there's a lot in EMS that we know, and that we know this. Yet when that information gets passed on, it gets passed on as a I think this. So then when it gets to the interventional cardiologist specifically, it becomes a I think this. But if we go back 2 steps, we knew it.
Yeah.
And so it was a known thing and so being able to get that information definitively can absolutely make a difference in that patient care. So because this is connected, and you may have mentioned this, but I just want to make sure we state it again. When is that information available?
There are certain pieces of information that are available in near real time. So certain elements about, all of this are available right away. And even before the ambulance arrives, while the device is being used, some of it's available. Other information comes immediately after the use of the product. So some of it takes a little bit more processing, a little bit longer to deal with. And so we're talking within minutes, though, after a AED product use, you're getting full pictures. And so some of it's real time or near real time. Some of it's immediately after a device is used, but it's fairly quick.
And more specifically, Jason, if you break that up, like what's real time that we're sharing? Really near real time is what's going to the 911 telecommunicator, right? They're seeing the location of the AED as it's en route. They're seeing that it's been powered on, that the pads have been placed, that they're in a shockable rhythm now or a non-shockable rhythm. They're seeing that 1 shock, 2 shocks were delivered. That's maybe the real-time communication or near real-time communication of this. During the actual emergency, or I should say maybe from the EMS standpoint of this, when you guys get to the scene, you're going to put your pads, you're going to put your monitor on this patient, and you power off our AED. At that point, we're basically now working to generate this incident report and send it up to the cloud as fast as we possibly can for anyone to be able to access at that point. So on our AED, you've got a unique incident ID that shows up after you power off the device. You've got a QR code. If you scan that QR code, shortly thereafter, you'll have an incident report with the full ECG, which in every step that's happened before that during the use of that device that's available to you. So that's maybe not real time until, that happens once you actually power off the device. We generate that full compiled report. But the real time piece of it is we're getting data to telecommunicators who we think are really the first line of response, the first responders in this. And we're trying to equip them with what they need while they're speaking to EMS. You guys, when you get there, can either scan that QR code, you can pass that incident ID downstream to healthcare providers, or you can even press a little arrow and it'll show you the basic details of what's happened. Hey, we delivered a 150 joule adult shock. This thing's been on and activated for 3 minutes and 64, I can't have 67 seconds, 3 minutes and 47 seconds. That basic information is available to you guys. But the full incident report is available after you power it off and you scan that QR code, and you can access it then.
So take us through a little bit of the 4-Minute City project and kind of the extent that you've gone to. Can you kind of introduce to us, can you kind of introduce Dr. Michael Kurz and his involvement with this project and kind of what your vision is as these AEDs are deployed and these 4-Minute Cities are formed? How are you going to evaluate the success of this?
Absolutely. So right now we've got at least 3 communities that'll be involved in research in evaluating this program, and really the deployment of a connected system with an AED in a community. And those 3 communities are Jackson, Tennessee. We've got Forsyth County, Georgia, and Cumberland County, Pennsylvania. Dr. Michael Kurz, who is a leader in the resuscitation space from a research perspective, incredibly well published. He's an emergency medicine, I could call it, guru. He's played every role. He's been a medical director. He's been in fire. He's been on the EMS side. He understands the full picture of emergency medicine, but also cardiac arrest specifically is what he's really dove into. And Dr. Kurz will be one of the PIs for the study that we're going to run across these 3 communities to evaluate, are we improving outcomes here? And this is where data is super important, right, guys? If you don't have the data, one of the 4 pillars to our implementation that we think about in a 4-Minute City is constantly collect data, analyze data, and then iterate. Right, that is going to be one of the key pieces to the puzzle here. And so we're really excited to look at baseline, what's been going on in these communities pre-deployment, deploy the system, learn quickly, iterate the system, and then look at the outcomes 12, 24, 36 months later in those communities. This isn't an overnight success in these communities. It won't be. We aren't going to magically put 300 AEDs in a community and response times are going to drop to 4 minutes the next day. It requires education. It requires effort and diving in with those communities. But we hope to see 6, 12, 18, 24 months later, some really exciting save stories and some really exciting movement in outcomes in each of these communities. One thing I will say about each community that they have in common, Brandon, I mentioned, kind of those 2 pillars, right? Collaboration and a burning desire to do better. They all have, and they're all fine with me sharing, they all have below national average survival rates. That is exciting to us. And I think exciting to the community stakeholders, because we want to take that below national average survival rate and make it 18%, 20%, and see that happen pretty quickly here. And so there's tremendous opportunity and there's tremendous desire collectively to do better and ultimately research the impact of this deployment.
You've given us some insight on the selection of those communities. Are any of those communities, so to speak, turnkey ready, or what type of preparations and work have you had to put in in those communities in order to get them ready for this next stage when the AEDs are here.
If it was turnkey, it wouldn't be fun.
That's right. That's right.
That's the work. No, I don't think none of those communities, nor is any community probably ready to deploy something like this without work, right? It's totally different than how we've responded to or thought about responding to cardiac arrest before, thought about deploying AEDs, thought about AEDs being or interacting with AEDs in a specific community, whether it be on the public safety side or even on the community side. Like, you got to educate the community that, hey, 911 is going to be sending people with an AED to you. You're not on your own, right? That's a whole nother education piece of this puzzle. That's not just about deploying AEDs in the community. And so there's really four pieces to the puzzle that we think about when it comes to an implementation. And this is grunt work. It requires getting your hands dirty, and it requires getting in the community. Number one is how are we going to deploy these devices, and where and how, right? And the traditional model of putting an AED in a building that closes at 5 p.m. and that nobody can access is not going to work here if we're going to try to make an impact, right? Where do most arrests happen? 70 to 80% of arrests happen in the home and in residential settings, right? And so how are we going to get AEDs in that part of a community more quickly and more often? So getting creative about, is that first responders taking them home with them in their personal lives? Is it providers, healthcare providers having these available to them? Is it people who are, civically inclined and want to engage with their community, becoming a part of a group that has these AEDs and are trained to respond? Are we going to put them in the hands of DPW vehicles, right, that are mobile and dynamic around a community and that aren't just static in a building? That is a piece of this, but you have to create a culturally contextualized deployment in each of those communities. And that's a word that Dr. Kurz uses all the time. It's what you do in Jackson and what you do in Birmingham, Alabama, and what you do in Georgia are probably different. They're not the exact same deployment strategy. So where and how are you going to effectively deploy these in that community? Second is, how are you going to integrate this into the public safety workflow? You guys know this better than I do, but you've seen one EMS system, you've seen one EMS system, you've seen one 911 center, you've seen one 911 center. You have to find a way to make this work for public safety in that community. So Rory, says they can push this button. Well, it's not that simple, right? They're dealing with a call, and you've got to figure out how to change the workflow they've been doing for years to suddenly have this button that they're pushing to activate AEDs, right? And in all these communities, they have the desire and have figured out and want to do it, but there's work there to figure out with local stakeholders, how are we going to implement this into your current process that you have today? How are we going to have you scan this QR code when EMS shows up and get data to the hospital? All of these things are new. Third is kind of mass community education and awareness, and making the community aware of this program, aware of CPR, aware of cardiac arrest, and that being a piece of the puzzle. And then the fourth, like I mentioned, is constant evaluation of the data so that we can constantly get better even after we deploy the program. All of that is not simple. It requires a lot of work and a lot of emphasis with each community. And that's what we've really been trying to focus on over the last couple of years.
So let me ask you, Rory, one of the things that we have talked about a lot on this podcast, and something that I'm very passionate about, is understanding disparities of care. How can this type of data help us understand where these disparities are, and how can it address those?
Well, I think it really comes back to the deployment strategies, even from the beginning, and then the refinements that you make along the way. Unfortunately, with these communities that we are working with, and with other ones that we are preliminarily working with, we can already see it. If you look at the map, literally by zip code, by city ordinance codes and things of that nature, you can see survival rate differences, and you can plot it on a map, and you can align it really, really closely to socioeconomic disparities. And that's heartbreaking, right? Yeah. But it's because in a lot of cases, the more advantaged areas are going to be the ones that have invested a little bit more into things that could help them, including AEDs and other things like that. So one of our deployment strategies, and one of the things that we focus on in our research with Dr. Kurz, is affecting disparities, right? Because if we have a map of, all the cardiac arrests that are happening, we're not picking those, locations by, zip codes and other, codes like that. We're picking it by where in this community do we need the most devices, and where can we have the most effect. And so I think one of the challenges that we have in the deployment, and one of the, true, cultural tests and differences between, like Sameer mentioned, Jackson, Tennessee versus Birmingham, Alabama versus Pennsylvania versus Georgia versus California, is how you deploy in different areas within a community is different, right? Because in certain areas, some things will work very effectively, and in other areas of the community, different things will work very effectively. And so I think that from the onset, you have data that we can collect that shows those disparities and shows areas that we can focus on to level set and improve across the board. As you implement the program, you have a lot of really interesting opportunities to evaluate how you're doing based on that baseline that you already have. Because you know what the baseline was, you can see, have I improved it equally? Have I improved it so that we're more level now? Have I improved it just so that the better places in the community are just better now and the worst places stay worse, right? That's obviously not what we want, but you can iterate based on that information, and you can adjust what you're doing to try to address what you do want, which is that more level setting, so that you're affecting outcomes in all areas of the community, not just in, the more affluent ones.
All right. So thank you both so much for walking us through the story, the 4-Minute City, and the vision for Avive Solutions. What would we have to do in order to get a kind of a sneak peek product review here? Is that possible?
It's definitely possible. Yeah. The we can pull one just, out of the backpack. So
Perfect.
if I just grab one here,
It's in a backpack. How nice.
isn't that convenient? This is the Avive Connect AED. So if we just look at it, off the bat, the design intent, the whole product idea here is to make a device that is small, that is lightweight, that looks and feels like something that you would be comfortable picking up and using.
Yeah.
The device has a few things, right? When you just look at it at first, it's got a screen here on the front that, outside of an emergency, gives you a few different things. So you've got, device information, you've got training capabilities, you've got settings that you can adjust, you have notifications that you can receive. There's a whole slew of things that you get from that. The AED itself has a few different features and functions that you may expect or that you may not. There's a power button to turn it on, right? It's an important piece of it. You have a Spanish language button that you can press to change it to a Spanish audio instruction language. You've got a child button that will reduce the energy from a 150 joule biphasic shock down to a 50 joule biphasic shock for children. You've got the electrode pads that are stored here in this tab, which you can remove, and they will be placed on a patient in that case. And then you've got like rechargeability. So you've got a USB-C port right here on the side that you can plug the device into, and it'll charge up in a few hours, just like your iPhone would. So all of those things are really geared at making this device accessible, making it approachable, making it have all of the clinical functions that you would expect out of an AED, of course, and making it something that you would be proud and happy to own. If we want to do a demonstration here, we can do a couple things. We can simulate a nearby cardiac arrest, like we've talked about, the kind of this backbone of the 4-Minute City program. And we can also, turn the device on and see how it works. So in this situation, right, say that you have a person who has called 911 because there's a person who's unresponsive, not breathing normally. And so they've called 911 with a potential cardiac arrest emergency. And we've gone through the initial, 911 operator talking to that person, going down that decision tree, realizing that they should press that button that we were talking about earlier. That's the Launch Avive button. When they go and press that button,
Take this AED.
They're going to receive an alert that looks like this. So the AED is going to start audibly alerting that you need to bring this device, and you're going to see a walk and drive time to that location. And so if you go into that and you navigate to that emergency, you're going to get a map displaying.
Navigating to emergency.
Trying to get the screen to look good here. You're going to get a map displaying, here's where you are, and here's where the location of the cardiac arrest patient is, with an address on the top and a QR code that's scannable so that you can actually scan that with your own mobile phone if you would prefer to navigate, for example, if you're driving, and it will open automatically in your native Google or Apple Maps. And so you have the address that you're going to, you have any notes that the 911 dispatcher might be sending to you, you have the map for the visual of your location combined with the patient's location, and you have the ability to indicate that you are at the scene, which will allow the 911 operator to know that you're at the scene and help them get that information. So as I move with this device down the street towards that emergency location, my location will update on the map here locally so I can see it, and it will update on the 911 dispatcher's tool so they can see your progress towards that emergency location.
Wow, that's incredible. As you do that, as you accept that, and as you are moving, will it cancel the other AEDs that are nearby, or do those people continue to respond?
Yeah, right now we don't cancel it off of one person who's coming. And the motivation behind that is things can happen, right? You might accept the emergency and get to that map and realize it's somewhere you didn't want to go or too long, or something happens along the way that means you can't go anymore. And so we don't want to have, at least not initially, that kind of single point of failure and so much confidence in that one person that they're going to actually get there, that we are going to send multiple people if multiple people accept. Now, if we get, this is one of those iteration things, if we get to the point where we have too many people showing up to a cardiac arrest, that is a fantastic problem to have, right? And we can notch that back and not select as many people to alert. And if we are doing that, we are succeeding. And so, but right now in the initial, we got to get devices there. So yeah, I'd rather alert 2 or 3 in the hopes that one of them actually gets there.
But it is still only going to alert the AEDs that are in a certain geographical radius from the caller?
Right. So we are starting that as a 1 mile radius, basically. And so if you are within 1 mile of that cardiac arrest, that's when your device or your app will be alerted. Wow. If you're outside of that 1 mile radius, we consider that too far, and so you would not get alerted. And again, if we learn that that's the correct distance or that that's the incorrect distance and we should adjust it, that's the beauty, is that we can do that as we get the data back. So say that you've taken this device, you've navigated with the map, you've navigated to that patient's side, you arrive there, that's when you go and turn the device on. And so if, should we walk through that? Or
yeah, please, that'd be great.
So say you've gotten this device, you've seen the map, you've been able to navigate to the cardiac arrest patient's location, you have it here, and now it's time to use the device to help save that person's life. So to do that, we take the device, we press the power button, and we're going to turn it on, and you're going to hear the audio of the device, prompting you on how to treat the patient.
Powered on. Make sure 911 has been contacted. If the patient is under 8 years old, you must press the child button on the top of the device. Pull the red tab to start emergency. Expose the patient's bare chest, including bra.
So at this point, I'm going to do a little voiceover. This is where the electrode pads are stored. It's a little hard to see in the video. But what we will do,
once the patient's chest is exposed, peel open the package you pulled from the device and take out the pads inside.
You can have the pads here, which you can remove
Look
the
at the
seal
picture
for.
on the red pad. Peel off the red pad from the white liner and firmly stick on the patient's bare skin, exactly as shown.
So if I do that, I peel this off. I'm going to place it on my own chest.
Peel off the blue pad from the white liner and firmly stick on the patient's bare skin, exactly as shown.
So I'll do that with the blue pad now, right?
So it knows which pad you've pulled off and where the next one needs to go.
Directly on the patient's bare skin. Patient detected. Do not touch the patient or pads. Analyzing heart rhythm. Shock is not advised. It is now safe to touch the patient. Let's begin CPR. Stack both of your hands on the center of the patient's chest. If the patient is under 8 years old, use one hand for compressions. Start compressing hard and fast on each beat. Push, push, push.
So a couple of things here that I'll highlight, just given the speed of things. The first is, that was a shock not advised, because as we all know, one of the features of the device is that it will analyze your heart rhythm and it will only allow you to deliver that defibrillation shock if you have a shockable one. So because I'm alive and well and I'm not in cardiac arrest, it will not deliver the shock to me. It will only do so to somebody in VFib or VTAC that's in cardiac arrest. We do 2 minutes of CPR after that shock or that shock not advised, after which it will return to say, do not touch the patient, analyze the heart rhythm again, deliver the defibrillation shock if it's appropriate. So say that we go through this, say that it was a cardiac arrest patient that we have shocked a couple of times and that EMS arrives, right? So now they are taking over the scene. They're going to put the monitor on that patient. They're going to remove this device. They're going to turn it off. One of the things we talked about was the incident data that gets transferred. So as soon as you turn that device off, you get a screen that has an incident ID number and a scannable QR code. That incident ID number can be punched in by whoever. It can be somebody back at the hospital. It can be somebody in the cath lab. It can be somebody in the ambulance. It can be the 911 dispatcher. Anybody can punch in that incident ID number that's associated with this and receive the full report that we were discussing that has the ECG recorded from me, as a report that they have access to. You can also scan that QR code and it will pull that up directly instead of punching in the instant ID. If you're at the scene, you have the device and you can scan it there. If you go to the more details screen, it's going to show you a few bullet points. So one of those would be the time since activation. One of those would be any timestamps of analyses that happened. So if you had a shock delivered, it would tell you that. If you had a shock not advised, as in this case, it tells you that. So it gives you kind of a brief summary there of what happened. And then finally, one of the kind of underappreciated pieces of this is that it reminds you to return the device. So the device came from somewhere because you picked it up to go take it somewhere, right? And so it's going to give you the address and the contact information for who that device is registered to. You should probably remember where you grabbed it from, but if you didn't, it would tell you that. But more importantly, it prompts you that you got to go put it back. And so it's also, sending alerts to our systems that are notifying the owner of this device, because it's not always the owner of the device that will be using it. Yeah. That device has been activated and that they have potentially some follow-ups they might need to or want to do. So that's the kind of core use, right? You get that emergency alert, that big red screen we saw that gives you the estimated time to the location. Pressing the accept button gives you the navigation map, which shows you the location of yourself and the location of the patient you're navigating to. As you move to that patient, that information is uploading back to the 911 dispatchers. They can see your progress. When you arrive on the scene, you're able to power the device on. It gives you audio prompts to remove the pads and place them on the patient's bare skin. I've placed it just under my shirt here because of the demonstration. We don't need to get the shirts off or anything like that. And then after doing so, you get analysis, you get shock, you get CPR prompts. Once all of that is done, you power the device off. You're able to access that incident report via the incident ID number or the scannable QR code, and even some of the information right there on the screen. And then that's really the core workflow, we'll say, of when that emergency happens, what's going to happen within, we'll say 10 to 15 minute span.
Okay, so one quick question I have that I really would like you to address is, two things very interesting about this on the instruction. Number one, there's video instruction of where to put your hands and kind of how to do it. The other is clear instruction, and I noticed a push, push, push. How much thought went into that? Is that just something that you decided, or was that intentional?
This one, in a lot of ways, is a parallel to the example Sameer brought up earlier about the intentional. If we look at the pad, the intentional depiction of a woman with breasts on the pads, and in the same way, what we found in our many usability studies is that we always had the metronome. The metronome always kind of made sense of like we should have some rate that you're compressing on to aid the user there, but people didn't necessarily make the connection of, oh, I'm supposed to be doing CPR, and then, oh, that's the beat that I'm supposed to be pushing to. Advanced people who kind of knew what they were doing certainly did very immediately, right? But people who just like picked this up and have never heard of a defibrillator, never heard of cardiac arrest before in their life, it's not that automatic of a jump. And so we found that the push like prompts them into action. And so it's a push, and they're like, oh, right, I'm supposed to be pushing at that, right? And that is an immediate, although seemingly obvious step. It really gets that person who's kind of frozen and like freaking out into an actual thing that they're doing. And so we found that improved the usability dramatically, and it wasn't inherently obvious, not something we started with. And it's kind of another example of those iterations that are very purposeful and those small details that make a little difference.
Wow, that's fantastic. So just in closing, a couple other just kind of technical questions. This is obviously a portable device that you mentioned before has a charger. How long does it take to charge? And how long does it last with a full charge?
To charge the device, it takes a few hours. So very similar to your phone, it takes a few hours to go from a battery dead to a full charge on that battery. In terms of off the charger, right? You take the device, it's not plugged in, you got it in your glove box of your car, you got it in a backpack. The life-saving AED battery will last you 8.5 months, in between those recharge cycles. And so you've got that pretty long period there where you can not have to worry about plugging in at all.
Wow. And how many shocks can you get out of a fully charged battery?
A fully charged will give you about 75 shocks. And so, that's more than enough for any reasonable use case, we'll say.
And then kind of one last question with the technology and the connectivity. What is the advantage of having these connected as far as them doing, do they do regular self-checks like other AEDs? And then how can someone manage these AEDs remotely, or can they manage them remotely?
Yeah, I mean, one of the beauties is it's fantastic to have the solution for when you need it in that emergency, but it better be ready to be used in that emergency. Otherwise, it's just a brick on a wall. And so the device does do a self-check every night. It happens in the middle of the night. And it does different levels of self-checks on a daily, weekly, monthly level, getting more and more rigorous. Every single night when it does those, it's going to send the self-check result up to our management platform. We call it the Real Connect platform. And that's a tool where whether you own one device or whether 100 devices or whether you own 1,000 devices, you can see the location and the statuses of your device at any time. And so you can log on with your account and portal, and you can see the locations, the statuses, any notifications for actions you might need to do, i.e. replace a cartridge when battery has a battery low, whatever it might be, it's going to send you a notification. And the premise there is that it's a little bit more automated way to manage these devices as opposed to relying on people going to manually inspect them, which, as we know, does not always happen, unfortunately.
Wow. Well, we're going to close it up here, but we always want to give an opportunity for the guests to, you have just anything else you'd like to say, or anything else, any other points that you wish we would have asked?
I think maybe what I'll say is, we're really excited that we're bringing new technology to the space. It's sorely needed. It's been needed for decades now. I think we're the first, Rory and the team, we're doing the first, we're doing a quick calculation. I think we're the first new company to receive an FDA approval for an AED in 20 years. And so, it's a huge milestone for the team. We're really proud to be here. It's hard to build technology that changes a paradigm that hopes to make an impact and make a difference, but we're thrilled to now have an opportunity to go make an impact in communities, and appreciate everyone's support along the way.
One thing to add, I think the thing that I would probably think Sameer as well, and probably the whole team here is most excited for in the coming year or just in the near future, is we're going to have saved our first life in a very, very short period of time. And, the company, if you go all the way back to, my dorm room with Mosley's silly idea, going from that kind of just hodgepodge thing 6 years ago to now being in a position that in likely a matter of months, we're going to have been we're going to have saved our first life is just an insane thing. And I think I don't really have the words for it. It's going to be kind of like that initial conference where you don't appreciate it, or you don't like really like internalize it until you see it and you feel it. But the idea that this crazy idea that came out of this brainstorming session turned into a company, turned into a full FDA clearance, turned into a device is going to save the life of somebody that we can go and see in the hospital is just the most crazy series of events that could have happened in my life, and something that I think we are all so excited about. And it's going to be a really powerful moment. So that's what I'm most excited for in the near future. And I think that's what the team is most excited for in the near future.
And that is beautiful. Wow. That is awesome.
Well said. Well said. In closing, how can people find more about you?
Pretty easy. Go to our website, www.avive.life, AVIVE.life. And that's where you'll learn everything about us.
Any socials?
I don't know them. That's pretty bad.
I can tell you that we do have all the
TikTok.
Socials. We have a Facebook, we got a TikTok, we got an Instagram, we have a Twitter.
Do not have a TikTok.
We have a TikTok. Check
us
out.
Oh man.
We learned we didn't know we had a TikTok, but then we learned that we have a TikTok. And so you can check us out in all those places.
Nice. Right, we'll stick with the website.
I think
yeah.
Well, gentlemen, this has been fascinating. To see where this we don't often get to see where this technology starts with just brainstorming, but a lot of us have great ideas, but to be able to be those that actually implement them and disrupt this industry, especially an industry that is going to not only save lives, but who knows the generations that come from just one life saved. And I appreciate your passion, appreciate your intelligence, your drive, and for making jobs like ours easier, for identifying what the need is, and to be able to impact that. I think you're right, Roy. I think we're gonna look back on this, and we're just gonna celebrate just so many lives saved. And we appreciate the work you do. We appreciate the future that is bright, and we look forward to what is to come.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you all.